Billionaire sat in her diner every night, until she realized why. The first time he walked in, the bell above the door barely made a sound. The place was quiet, filled with the low hum of late-night truckers and the smell of burnt coffee and cinnamon pie. He didn't look like he belonged there. His suit alone was worth more than the entire building. But he sat down in the same booth by the window, ordered black coffee, and stared out into the rain as if the world outside had forgotten him. Maya noticed everything. She always did. Working nights at the small-town diner taught her to read people in silence. The trucker who missed home, the teenager hiding bruises under a hoodie, the lonely widower who came just to hear someone say his name. But this man was different. There was something in the way he held the cup, the tension in his jaw. Like someone who'd built empires but lost the ability to rest. She smiled at him, soft and unassuming, the kind of smile that didn't ask questions but said, "You're safe here." He didn't smile back, just nodded, as if smiling was something he'd forgotten how to do. And still, every night after that, he came back. Same booth, same coffee, same silence. Sometimes she thought he didn't even drink the coffee. It just cooled between his fingers while he stared out the window. Once she tried to make conversation. "Rough day?" she'd asked. He looked up briefly, his eyes an ocean of exhaustion. "Every day," he said simply. Then he left a $100 bill for a $2 coffee. She didn't know whether to feel grateful or insulted. He became a mystery whispered among the staff. Maybe he's hiding from someone. Maybe he lost a bet. Maybe he's a writer looking for inspiration. Maya didn't join the gossip. She'd seen enough pain to know that some silences aren't for prying. Sometimes, when she wiped down the counter after midnight, she caught herself glancing at his reflection in the window. She wondered what his story was, and why he looked like a man waiting for something that never came. If you believe that love still changes people, stay with us. Because sometimes a stranger's kindness can reach the heart that money never could. His name, she learned eventually, was Lucas Vale, billionaire investor. The newspapers called him ruthless, brilliant, untouchable. He was the kind of man who could buy entire companies before breakfast. Yet there he was, alone night after night, in a diner that smelled of coffee and broken dreams. When she looked at him, she didn't see the billionaire everyone feared. She saw someone who'd forgotten what warmth felt like, and for reasons she couldn't explain, that hurt her more than it should have. One night, just past midnight, a storm hit. Thunder rolled over the valley, lights flickered and the wind howled through the cracked door. Most of the customers rushed to their cars, but Lucas stayed. He sat quietly, untouched by the chaos, his hand resting over the steaming cup. "You don't have to wait out the storm alone," Maya said softly as she refilled his coffee. Her voice was almost drowned by the rain. He looked up at her, really looked this time. His gaze wasn't cold, just tired, haunted by things she couldn't see. "Some storms," he said, "don't stop when the rain does." The words hung between them, heavy and human. For the first time, she realized that beneath the polished suit and distant eyes, there was a man drowning quietly behind walls built out of guilt and gold. When the lights went out, the diner went dark, except for the flicker of candles Maya lit along the counter. She brought one to his table. The flame danced between them, golden and fragile, and for a moment their faces glowed in its light. He looked different in the candlelight, not intimidating, not powerful, just real. The rain softened outside, but neither of them moved. She stood there longer than she should have, and he didn't tell her to leave. When she turned to walk away, his voice stopped her. "You don't even know who I am. I know you look like someone who hasn't slept in a long time," she said gently, "and someone who needs a warm cup of coffee more than anyone I've ever met." Something shifted in his expression, not a smile, but the ghost of one. It was enough. That night, as she locked up the diner, she saw him standing by his car in the parking lot, staring at the neon sign that flickered open even though it wasn't. He looked lost, as if he'd forgotten where he was supposed to go. Then, before getting into his car, he glanced back toward her through the rain. A brief look, like gratitude, like recognition. He would return the next night. And the next. But it would be weeks before Maya discovered the truth behind why he sat in her diner every night. And when she did, her whole world and his one would never be the same. Lucas Vale didn't believe in chance. His entire empire had been built on precision, control, and numbers that never lied. Yet every night, He found himself driving 40 minutes away from the glass towers and spotless marble floors of Vale Industries to sit in that small-town diner with flickering lights and scratched tables. He told himself it was the coffee, the quiet, the anonymity. But deep down he knew that wasn't true. It was her Maya, the waitress who never asked questions, who smiled like the world hadn't broken her yet. In her eyes there was no fear of him, no calculation, no agenda. It was unsettling. For years he'd been surrounded by people who only saw the billionaire, never the man. But she treated him like a person who might be worth saving. He didn't know what she saw when she looked at him, but he knew what he saw in her. Peace. The kind of peace he hadn't felt since before his father's death, before the boardroom wars and the lawsuits that followed. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that made him question everything he thought he knew about strength. The following night, the storm had passed, but the air still smelled of rain. Lucas arrived later than usual, expecting the diner to be half empty. Instead, he found Maya sitting at the counter, a book open beside the register. She looked up and smiled when she saw him, as if she'd been waiting. "You're late," she said playfully. He hesitated. No one ever spoke to him like that. "Traffic," he replied simply, though the truth was he'd spent 20 minutes in his car convincing himself not to come. She poured his coffee before he even asked. "You seem like the kind of man who doesn't like being late for anything." "I don't," he admitted, "but I'm beginning to think this place doesn't run on time." Her laugh was soft, like the first break of dawn. "That's because here time stops for people who need a moment to breathe." He studied her for a long second, the corners of his mouth curving slightly. "And what about you? Do you ever stop to breathe?" "I try," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "But rent doesn't wait for fresh air." He admired her honesty. In his world, people lied for a living. Smiles were weapons, words were investments. Maya's truth felt disarming. For the first time, he stayed past closing. The other customers left one by one, until it was just them and the low hum of the coffee machine. She wiped the counter, humming quietly to a song playing from an old radio. He recognized the tune, something from decades ago, and it pulled something buried inside him to the surface. "You like old music?" he asked. "I like music that remembers," she replied. "Songs that sound like someone lived through them." He nodded slowly. "Most people I know only listen to what makes them forget." "That's sad," she said softly. "Forgetting doesn't heal anything." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She could see it in his eyes, the weight he carried, the exhaustion that came from years of building a fortress so no one could ever hurt him again. When he finally stood to leave, he reached for his wallet. She stopped him with a gentle hand over his. "You already paid for the coffee." "You don't have to keep leaving these," she said, holding up another $100 bill. He hesitated. "I don't like owing anyone." "Then don't owe me," she said. "Just come back when you need a quiet place." Her words landed somewhere deep. It had been years since anyone offered him something without a price attached. He nodded once, pocketing the money, and walked out into the night with a strange feeling he couldn't name. The next morning, his assistant, Claire, noticed the change. "You look different," she said during a meeting. "Different?" he asked, calmer. She replied cautiously. "Or maybe distracted." Lucas dismissed her with a look, but even he could feel it, the stillness she'd brought into his chaos. It followed him like sunlight sneaking through closed blinds. Days turned into weeks. The diner became his sanctuary, and Maya his quiet companion in the shadows. They talked about simple things, books, music, small-town gossip. She told him about her younger brother in college, about her mother's bakery that went bankrupt, about how she worked 2 jobs but still believed people were good. He didn't tell her much in return, but he listened, really listened. And that was new for him. What Maya didn't know was that Lucas Vale hadn't stumbled into her diner by accident. Weeks earlier, his company had acquired the land the diner stood on. It was scheduled for demolition to make way for another luxury development. He had signed the papers himself, a decision that had barely registered among 100 others that week. But then, his car had broken down near that very diner the same night the deal was finalized. He'd gone inside to wait for a driver. And something about the place, about her, had stopped him from making the call that would erase it all. Maya stayed longer than she had planned. 1 week turned into 2, and each morning she woke to the scent of earth and sun. to the sound of wind through the vines, and to Lucas's quiet voice calling her name with the same reverence he once reserved for success. They didn't talk about the past much. They didn't need to. The vineyard became their language. Mornings spent pruning vines side by side, evenings watching the sun bleed gold over the hills. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. The silence between them was no longer distance. It was understanding. One night, as they sat on the porch, the world wrapped in twilight, Maya broke the stillness. "You ever miss it?" she asked. "Miss what?" "The city. The noise. The power." He thought for a long moment before answering. "I miss who I thought I was there. The man who never made mistakes. The one who didn't feel anything." "Sounds lonely," she said softly. "It was," he admitted. "But loneliness is predictable." "This," he looked at her, eyes reflecting the fading light. "This is terrifying," she smiled gently. "Why?" "Because I've never had something I couldn't control," he said. "And I can't control how I feel when I look at you." Her breath caught, her heart fluttering at the honesty in his voice. He wasn't confessing love in grand words. He was confessing change. And somehow that felt even deeper. They sat there for a long while, the sound of crickets weaving through the night. Then quietly she said, "Maybe you're not supposed to control it. Maybe it's supposed to undo you." He let out a breath that sounded like surrender. "Then consider me undone." The next morning, he took her to the edge of the property where a new structure was being built. Small, wooden, filled with sunlight. "What is this?" she asked. "A school," he said. "For the workers' kids. Some of them travel hours every day to the nearest one. I figured they deserve better." Her eyes softened. "You did this?" He shrugged. "With some help. I'm learning to build things that don't make me richer, just better." She smiled, pride and affection mingling in her expression. "You really have changed," he met her gaze. "You helped me remember what kind of man I wanted to be." That night after dinner, he handed her a small wooden box. Inside was a silver key. "What's this?" she asked. He hesitated. "To the little house by the west field. It's yours if you ever want to stay." She looked up at him, startled. "Lucas, you don't have to decide now," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know that if you ever need a place, not mine but yours, and it's here." Her throat tightened, her voice almost breaking. "You don't have to give me anything." He shook his head. "I'm not giving you something. I'm giving back what you gave me. A home I didn't know I needed." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "You have no idea what that means to me." "I do," he said softly. "Because it means everything to me, too." For the first time, Maya didn't fight what she felt. She reached out, touching his cheek, her hand trembling. His breath hitched as her thumb brushed against his jaw. The tension that had built between them for months finally broke like rain on dry ground. He leaned forward slowly, as if afraid the moment might disappear if he moved too fast. Their lips met, not in passion but in peace. It was a kiss that felt like forgiveness, like homecoming, like every unspoken word finding its voice. When they parted, she stayed close, her forehead resting against his. "You were right," she whispered. "This is terrifying," he smiled. "Then we're both brave." In the days that followed, something wordless settled between them. Not perfection, but presence. Lucas still carried his old instincts, overthinking, controlling, trying to protect. Maya still feared trusting what could be taken away. But they learned to meet in the middle, to give without losing themselves. And yet life, as it always does, began to test the fragile balance they had built. One afternoon, a sleek black car appeared at the edge of the vineyard. Adrian stepped out, the same polished calm as before, though his eyes held worry. "Lucas," he said, "you need to come back." Lucas frowned. "Why?" "The board's in chaos. One of your partners, the one who took over after you left, he's been making deals that could destroy everything. They're using your name to justify them." Lucas's jaw tightened. "Then stop him." "I can't," Adrian said. "Only you can." Maya stood behind him, silent but tense. Lucas turned toward her, the conflict written across his face. "If I go," he said quietly, "I don't know when I'll come back." She nodded, though her chest felt hollow. "Then go, do what you have to. Just don't forget what you found here." He took her hand, gripping it tightly. "I won't, I promise." The next morning he was gone. The vineyard felt emptier than it had in months. Maya kept busy, helping the workers, managing the diner from afar, pretending the ache in her chest was just the wind. Weeks passed. Then months, and though the seasons changed again, she still looked toward the road sometimes, half expecting to see a black car and a man who'd once traded power for peace. But what she didn't know, not yet, was that when he returned, he would not be the same man who left. Winter returned, soft and pale, wrapping the vineyard in silver mist. The vines slept beneath frost, and so did the dreams that once bloomed there. Maya spent her mornings walking the rows alone, her breath turning to clouds in the cold air. It had been nearly 6 months since Lucas left for the city. Letters came sometimes, brief, careful. He wrote about meetings, changes, people he once called partners now turning into strangers. But beneath the neat handwriting, she could feel the exhaustion in his words. He didn't say it directly, but she could tell. The city was swallowing him again. One evening, after locking the small schoolhouse he'd built, she sat on the steps with a blanket over her shoulders. The vineyard glowed faintly under the moonlight, and the loneliness pressed against her like a weight. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Come back before you forget what it feels like to breathe." Miles away, in a boardroom that stretched higher than most people's dreams, Lucas sat in silence while men argued about numbers, power, and mergers. He no longer recognized himself in their words. The man who once commanded the room now felt like an imposter wearing his old skin. When the meeting ended, Adrian followed him out. "You're doing good work, Lucas. You've stabilized everything. At what cost?" Lucas asked quietly. Adrian hesitated. "I can't save everyone." "I know," Lucas said, looking down at his hands that hadn't touched soil or sunlight in half a year. "But I could have stayed safe myself." That night he stood by the window of his penthouse staring at the city lights. They glittered like promises, but none of them felt real. In their reflection he saw Maya's face, the warmth in her eyes, the peace in her voice. He whispered her name once, as if it could anchor him. Then he made a decision. 3 days later, Maya was closing up the diner early when the door chimed. She didn't look up right away. "Sorry, we're closed for the night." "I know," came the reply. She froze. That voice, steady, deep, familiar. When she turned, he was there, standing just inside the doorway. He looked thinner, older somehow, but his eyes still carried the same gentleness she remembered. "Lucas." Her voice broke on his name. He took a breath, stepping closer. "You said not to forget what it feels like to breathe. I tried, but it turns out I couldn't without you." Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head, torn between relief and anger. "You left. You said you'd come back, but you didn't." "I wanted to," he said, "but I had to finish what I started. And I hated every second of it." "Then why stay?" she asked softly. "Because walking away from what I built without learning how to face it would have meant I was still running." Maya looked at him, searching for truth. She found it in the cracks of his voice, in the way his shoulders sagged, no longer proud but human. "I lost things," he said quietly. "Investors, friends, almost everything I owned. But I don't care, because somewhere along the way I realized the one thing I couldn't lose was what you gave me. The part of me that finally learned how to feel." Her tears fell silently. "You think you can just walk back in here and fix everything?" He shook his head. "No, I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here to ask if there's still something left to build." The words hung between them, trembling with hope and fear. Maya took a step toward him. "You can't keep disappearing every time life hurts." "I won't," he said firmly. "Not again." She studied him for a long time. Then, slowly, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver key he'd once given her. She placed it in his hand. "I kept it," she said softly, "even when I told myself I shouldn't." He closed his fingers around it, then let me earn it back. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and quiet. The diner windows glowed with warmth as they stood there. The billionaire who'd lost everything, and the woman who'd taught him what mattered. Maya finally smiled through her tears. "You know, the coffee's still terrible." He laughed, the sound full and real for the first time in months. "Then I guess some things never change." They sat together that night, long after the lights went out, talking about everything and nothing. About the vineyard, about the city, about second chances that don't come twice unless you fight for them. And for the first time, Lucas didn't feel like two people anymore. The man the world had made him, and the man she'd helped him find. Then one afternoon, a stranger walked in. Not from town, that was obvious. He wore a tailored jacket, not quite as fine as Lucas's, but expensive enough to draw attention. His hair was slicked back, his smile polished. He looked around before approaching the counter. "You're Maya, right?" She nodded cautiously. "Can I get you something?" He leaned forward. "Actually, I was hoping for a conversation. My name's Adrian Vale. Lucas is my brother." Her hands stilled. The name hit her like a quiet wave. "Your brother?" He nodded. "Haven't seen him in months." No one has, really. He left the company, left the city, left everything. "I thought maybe you'd know where he went." "I don't," she said truthfully, though her heart raced. "He never told me." Adrian studied her for a moment. "He must have trusted you." "That's rare for him." Maya said nothing, but the look in her eyes said enough. Adrian sighed. "He's complicated. Always has been. Our father raised us to believe emotions were liabilities. But Lucas, he always fought that. Quietly, he just didn't know how to win." She listened, unsure whether to feel defensive or understanding. "Why are you looking for him?" "Because," Adrian said, his tone softening, "I think he's finally trying to live. And for once, I don't want him to do it alone." He slid a business card across the counter. "If he contacts you, tell him I'm sorry, and tell him I miss my brother." When he left, Maya stood there for a long while staring at the empty doorway. The Vale family. She'd read about them in headlines, seen them on magazine covers. But in that moment, all she could picture was Lucas, sitting quietly in that booth, hands wrapped around a coffee mug, eyes that carried a sadness she hadn't known how to name. That night, after closing, she opened his old letter again. She'd memorized every word, but this time she noticed something she hadn't before. A faint watermark at the bottom, from rain or maybe a tear. It felt human, vulnerable. She whispered into the quiet, "Where did you go, Lucas?" Miles away, Lucas stood at the edge of a small vineyard in Northern California. The sun dipped low, painting gold across the hills. His suit was gone. His hands, once used to signing contracts, now bore faint traces of soil. He'd bought the land months ago under an alias, not for profit but for peace, a place to build something with his hands, not his money. The work was hard, humbling, the silence at first unbearable. But over time, he began to find comfort in the rhythm, the vines, the wind, the smell of earth. Claire visited once, shaking her head in disbelief. "You've gone from boardrooms to grapevines," she said, half laughing. He smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how similar they are. Both need patience. Both can rot if you stop caring." "And her?" Claire asked gently. "You ever think of going back?" He looked toward the horizon. "Every day." "Then why don't you?" He hesitated, his voice quiet. "Because she deserves a man who's done healing, not one who's still learning how to feel." Back in the diner, Maya couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, listening to the rain. Her brother's words replayed in her mind. Maybe he regrets losing something he didn't mean to. She realized something then. Forgiveness wasn't about erasing what happened. It was about freeing yourself from what kept you standing still, so she made a decision. 2 weeks later, Maya closed the diner for a week, the first break she'd ever taken. She told Tom she needed to breathe somewhere new. She didn't tell him about the ticket folded in her pocket, the one marked California. The journey felt surreal. Planes, cars, roads winding through quiet towns and green hills. And then there it was, a sign that read Vale Vineyard. Her heart pounded as she walked through the gate. Workers moved among the vines, laughter drifting on the breeze. And there, standing beneath the shade of an old oak tree, was Lucas. He looked different, freer. His sleeves were rolled up, his hair slightly tousled, and when he turned, the sun caught his eyes in a way that made her forget every word she'd planned to say. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the wind and the sound of their hearts catching up to the moment. "Finally," she said softly, "you weren't easy to find." His lips curved into a quiet, disbelieving smile. "You came." "I did," she said. "Because you left without giving me a choice to stay." He stepped closer, his voice low. "I didn't think I deserved one." Maya met his gaze, steady and clear. "Then maybe you never understood what I saw in you." And as the breeze moved through the vines, carrying the scent of new beginnings, he realized that some people don't just forgive you. They bring you back to life. For a long time, they stood there among the vines, saying nothing. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was full. Full of everything they hadn't said, full of the memories that had followed them both across the miles. The air was warm, the light soft, and when Lucas finally spoke, his voice carried a sincerity she'd never heard before. "I thought about this moment," he said quietly. "Every morning, every night. But in my version, you never came." Maya smiled faintly. "And in mine, you didn't stay gone this long." He laughed under his breath, the sound rusty, like something he hadn't used in a while. "But you always did know how to disarm me." She looked around the vineyard. "So this is your world now? Grapes instead of glass towers." "Something like that," he said, following her gaze. "When I left the city, I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I couldn't live in that cage anymore. I thought maybe if I started from nothing, I'd find who I was before everything got lost." "Did you?" she asked softly. He paused, meeting her eyes. "I'm still learning. But it's quieter here, and sometimes in the quiet, I can almost hear myself again." Maya nodded, her expression tender. "You don't need to be fixed, Lucas. You just need to be honest. With yourself and with me." He swallowed, his voice rough. "I wasn't honest before. I thought I was protecting you. From me, from what I represented. But all I did was run from the only person who ever saw me as more than a name." She stepped closer, her voice steady but gentle. "I never wanted your name, Lucas. I wanted your truth." For a moment, his composure slipped completely. He looked at her as if seeing her for the first time again. The same light, the same grace, the same quiet fire that had undone him from the beginning. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to be someone who deserves someone like you." Maya smiled through the ache in her chest. "Then start by being someone who tries." The vineyard wind carried the faint hum of distant laughter from the workers, the scent of ripening fruit. The world felt impossibly still, as if even time itself had chosen to pause and listen. He exhaled and for the first time let the truth fall unguarded. "You changed me, Maya. I didn't even believe people could change. I spent years building a life so no one could touch me. Then you walked in with a cup of bad coffee and ruined all of it." Her laughter broke softly, tears glinting in her eyes. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It is," he said, smiling. "The biggest one I know how to give." They walked through the rows together, slowly, their shoulders brushing but not quite touching. He showed her the vines, the small house he'd built on the property, the workshop where he spent his mornings. Everything was simple, raw wood, sunlight, silence. "It's peaceful," she said. He nodded. "It is, but it's missing something." Her brow lifted slightly. "What?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Someone to share it with." Her heart tightened. The air around them felt different now, charged, intimate. They stopped beneath a trellis heavy with green leaves. His hand hovered near hers, hesitant, as if afraid to cross a line that once hurt them both. She didn't move away. "Lucas," she said softly, "you don't have to prove anything to me. Not with grand gestures, not with money, not with places like this. I don't care where you are. I just care who you are when you're there." He closed his eyes briefly, her words landing deep. When he looked at her again, there was no distance, no walls, only vulnerability. "Then I need you to know who I am now," he said quietly. "A man who failed too many times at being human, but who never stopped wanting to be worthy of you." For the first time since they'd met, she saw him without any trace of control. Just a man, and flawed, remorseful and real. Her fingers brushed his lightly and he froze. The touch was so small, yet it felt like the earth itself shifted beneath them. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Everything she wanted to say was already in her eyes. He reached for her hand then, slow and uncertain, as if asking permission. When their fingers intertwined, it wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, trembling, alive. They stood there for what felt like forever. The vineyard glowed in the golden hour light, and somewhere nearby a wind chime whispered through the air. When he finally spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. "I don't deserve this." "Maybe not," she said softly. "But sometimes love doesn't wait for you to deserve it. It just finds you when you're finally ready to stop running." He looked at her, eyes glimmering with a kind of emotion he'd long forgotten how to name. And in that moment, under the endless sky, Lucas Vale, the billionaire, who once measured worth in numbers, realized he was holding the only thing that had ever truly made him rich. The days that followed felt like a slow unfolding of everything they had been holding back. The following evening, a letter arrived in her mailbox. No name on the front, just her address written in neat, deliberate handwriting. Inside was a check, not from Lucas, but from Vale Industries Charity Foundation. It was a donation to fund repairs for the town's community center. And attached to it, a single handwritten note, "For the places that make life worth living. L." Maya stared at it for a long time, her throat tightening. He wasn't trying to buy forgiveness. He was still watching from afar, still trying to fix things in his quiet, imperfect way. That night she locked up early. She stood outside the diner looking up at the same dark road he used to drive down. The air was cold and the world felt too still. "Come back," she whispered to the night, even though she didn't believe he would. But miles away in his office, Lucas held the same diner mug he'd bought online, the same brand she used. He stared at it, untouched coffee cooling inside. He'd told himself that letting her go was the right thing, that she deserved freedom from everything he represented. But when he closed his eyes, all he could see was her, that spark of defiance when she stood in his office, the way her laughter softened the hardest corners of his heart. He picked up his phone, hesitated, then set it down again. Claire's voice echoed from an earlier conversation. "You can't fix people from a distance, Lucas. At some point you have to show up." For the first time in months, he decided she might be right. The next morning, he told his driver to take him back to the small town. The diner door jingled open just after sunrise. Maya was sweeping the floor, not expecting customers yet. When she looked up and saw him standing there, she froze. He looked different, tired, humbled, without the armor of power that had once surrounded him. "I didn't come to make excuses," he said quietly. "I came to say thank you for reminding me what it feels like to be human." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You already said it, with this place." He smiled faintly. "Maybe. But I needed to say it here. To you." She looked at him for a long moment, her heart pulling in directions she didn't want to name. "Coffee?" she asked finally. He nodded. "Please." As she poured his cup, the room felt both painfully familiar and completely new. He took a sip, wincing at the bitterness. She laughed softly. "Still terrible?" she asked. "Worse," he said, smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. For a moment they just stood there, two worlds colliding again. Wealth and warmth, guilt and grace, both realizing they had been waiting for this moment since the night everything fell apart. And as sunlight broke through the blinds, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that might become it. Over the following days, Lucas kept returning to the diner, not every night, but often enough that people began to notice. The locals still looked at him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. The suits, the car, the quiet air of control. He didn't belong there, and everyone knew it. But Maya treated him no differently than before. She didn't flatter him, didn't ask about his business, didn't feed his ego. She served his coffee, listened when he spoke, and left space for silence when he didn't. It was in those silences that something began to grow. Not romance, and not yet, but understanding. A fragile bridge between two lives that were never meant to meet. One evening, as she wiped down the counter, he asked, "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" She shrugged. "Sometimes, but this town, it's home. My mom used to say roots aren't chains, they're reminders of where you learn to stand." He smiled faintly. "And you? Where did you learn to stand?" "Right here," she said. "Between spilled coffee and second chances." He looked down, tracing the rim of his cup. "I used to think standing meant never falling." Maya tilted her head, studying him. "Maybe it just means getting up again." He met her eyes. For the first time, she saw something unguarded in him, not power or control, but weariness. A man who had spent years fighting battles no one else could see. Outside, the neon sign flickered, humming softly. Inside, time seemed to hold its breath. The next day, Tom approached her quietly. "You sure about this?" he asked. "Having him here all the time? People are talking." "Let them," she said. "They don't know him." Tom gave her a look. "Neither do you." That night, she thought about those words long after the lights went out. Maybe Tom was right. She didn't know everything about Lucas Vale. But what she did know was that he wasn't the man the tabloids painted him to be. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't heartless. He was lost and trying to find something no amount of money could buy. Meanwhile, Lucas's life outside the diner was beginning to fracture. His board accused him of distraction. Contracts slipped. Deals fell apart. He was no longer the man who could turn steel and glass into fortune. Because for the first time, he'd found something that couldn't be measured in profit, and he didn't know how to balance that equation. Claire confronted him one afternoon. "You've missed 3 meetings this week, Lucas. This isn't like you." He didn't look up from the window. "Maybe that's the point," she sighed. "You think you can just walk away from everything you built, from who you are?" He turned to her. "I think who I am is exactly what I need to walk away from." She paused, realizing he wasn't being dramatic. He was serious. "Does she know?" "No," he said. "And she won't." "Why not?" "Because the last thing she needs is a man trying to buy redemption with his own ruin." That evening, he went to the diner as usual, but this time he didn't sit. He stood at the counter looking at Maya as she refilled a customer's cup. When she turned and saw him, she smiled, that same warm, quiet smile that had undone him the first night. "You're not sitting?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not tonight." She frowned slightly. "Everything all right?" He hesitated. "I just wanted to say thank you for reminding me what matters." Her voice softened. "You don't have to thank me for that." "Maybe not," he said, "but I needed to." Before she could reply, he placed a small envelope on the counter. "For the repairs on the roof," he said. "It leaks when it rains." "Lucas," she began, but he was already heading for the door. He didn't come back the next night, or the one after. Days turned into a week. The seat he always occupied stayed empty, and every time Maya walked past it, she felt something hollow inside her chest. She told herself it didn't matter, that he'd gone back to his world, the one that always came first. But when it rained again and water dripped from the same crack in the ceiling, she found the envelope still tucked under the register. Inside wasn't a check, just a folded piece of paper with one line written in neat handwriting. "Sometimes leaving is the only way to stay honest." She read it again and again, trying to understand. Honest about what? About her, about himself? A few days later, a black sedan stopped at the diner. It wasn't Lucas. It was Claire. The woman's elegance stood out in the small-town diner. Precise suit, calm authority, and eyes that missed nothing. "You must be Maya," she said kindly. "Yes," Maya replied carefully. "And you are? Someone who works for Lucas Vale." Maya's stomach turned. "Is he all right?" Claire hesitated, then nodded. "He will be. He's making changes. Big ones. He wanted you to have this." She handed over a simple sealed letter. "He said you'd understand." Maya looked down at it, but didn't open it right away. Claire watched her for a moment before adding quietly, "He talks about you. Not often. But when he does, he sounds like a man remembering sunlight after too many years underground." Maya's throat tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Claire said softly, "he won't." When Claire left, Maya stood alone behind the counter, the unopened letter trembling in her hands. The diner was quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. She sat down at his old booth and unfolded the envelope. Inside, a handwritten note. "You once said roots aren't chains. I think I finally believe you. I'm leaving the city for a while, not to run, but to start again. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know you were the reason I remembered what it means to feel alive. Thank you, Maya. L." Her eyes filled, but she smiled through the tears. He hadn't asked her to wait. He hadn't promised anything. And somehow that made it mean more. Because real love, she realized, doesn't demand. It transforms, and somewhere beyond the city lights, a man who once built an empire out of steel and solitude was learning how to rebuild himself out of hope. Spring came early that year, softening the edges of the small town. The air smelled of rain and fresh soil, and the diner filled again with regulars, truck drivers, school teachers, farmers with weathered hands. Life moved on, the way it always does. But for Maya, Time had slowed to something quieter, more reflective. She ran the diner herself now, with Tom helping part-time. The walls had been repainted, the floors repaired, and the little place that once felt fragile now felt alive. People said she was the heart of it, her kindness, her warmth, the way she remembered everyone's story. And though she smiled when they said that, she never mentioned the man whose absence still echoed in the quiet hours after closing. Sometimes she'd catch herself glancing at the booth where Lucas used to sit. She had stopped counting the days since he'd left, but his memory still lived in the way she poured coffee, the way she noticed when someone needed silence more than words. He told himself it didn't matter, that he was only delaying what was inevitable. But every night he sat there, it became harder to convince himself of that lie. Maya noticed his unease one evening when he barely touched his coffee. "You seem distracted," she said gently. "I'm just thinking," he replied. "Dangerous habit," she teased. "People start thinking too much. They forget how to feel." He met her gaze, his voice low. "What if thinking is the only thing keeping you from feeling too much?" Their eyes held, and for a moment the air between them felt charged. Not romantic, not yet, but alive with something neither could name. She looked away first, busying herself with the coffee pot. Her heart beat louder than the rain outside. Lucas stayed until she turned off the neon sign that read, "Open." She watched his car disappear down the empty road, unaware that the very man who kept coming back night after night was the same one who owned the deed to her diner, and that one signature from him could destroy everything she loved. And soon, she was going to find out. The news broke on a Thursday morning. Maya arrived at the diner early, carrying a box of muffins she'd baked at home. The air was crisp, sunlight spilling across the counter as she unlocked the door. But before she could hang her apron, her manager, Tom, was already there, pale and pacing. "They're shutting us down," he said without looking up. "Corporate notice came in overnight. The property's been sold to Vale Industries." "We've got 2 weeks." Her heart dropped. "Vale Industries?" she repeated. "As in Lucas Vale?" Tom nodded grimly. "The one and only. Seems the billionaire wants to build some fancy high-rise here. Guess small diners don't make the cut anymore." Maya stood frozen. For a second, her mind refused to connect the dots. The quiet man who drank black coffee at her counter every night. The one who listened when no one else did. The man who'd started to feel like a mystery worth knowing. She whispered almost to herself. "No, he wouldn't," Tom sighed. "They all do, Maya. Doesn't matter how they smile while they're doing it." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Customers came and went, unaware that the place would soon be gone. Maya served coffee, took orders, smiled through the ache building inside her chest. But when the clock hit 9 and Lucas walked in, his usual seat, his usual quiet, something inside her shifted. He noticed it immediately. "You're quiet tonight," he said. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Guess we all have our bad days." He nodded, sensing the distance. "Something happen?" She hesitated, then forced a light tone. "Nothing you'd care about," but she was wrong. He cared more than he should have. And the guilt that already haunted him now burned deeper. He stayed longer that night, trying to find the courage to say something, to tell her the truth. But every time he looked at her, saw the trust in her eyes, the words died in his throat. Instead, he left his usual generous tip, walked to the door, and paused. "Maya," he said quietly. She looked up. "Would you ever forgive someone?" he asked. "If they did something they didn't mean to, something that hurt people, even if they didn't realize it until it was too late?" She frowned, unsure what to make of the question. "Depends," she said slowly. "Did they try to fix it?" He looked away. "I'm trying." "Then maybe it's not too late," she said softly. But when he left, the paper in her hand trembled. She unfolded it, his bill with another $100 tip. And this time she didn't smile. 2 days later, she went to the city. She didn't know what she was doing or what she would say, but she couldn't stand waiting while her world fell apart. She found the address on the notice, Vale Industries headquarters. A glass tower that looked like it could touch the sky. The receptionist barely looked at her. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Maya said firmly. "But tell him it's urgent. Tell Lucas Vale that the diner he's tearing down isn't just a building." Something in her tone must have worked, because 10 minutes later, an assistant appeared. "Mr. Vale will see you." When she entered his office, the contrast hit her like a wave. The city lights stretched endlessly behind him, reflecting off the sharp lines of his desk. He stood, visibly surprised to see her there. "Maya." His voice was softer than she expected. "You shouldn't have come." "Then you shouldn't have lied," she said, her words trembling but steady. "You sat in that diner every night knowing what you were doing, knowing what it meant to us." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't plan it that way. I didn't even know it was your diner until after you'd already bought it," she interrupted. "That's convenient." He stepped closer, his expression raw. "You think I don't care? You think this is easy for me?" She met his gaze, her voice breaking. "I think you live in a world where people like me don't matter. And that diner, that place, is all some of us have left." The silence that followed was heavy. For once, the man who commanded empires had no words. Finally, she turned to leave. "Don't come back to the diner, Mr. Vale. Not tonight, not ever." He wanted to stop her, to explain, to fix it somehow. But when the elevator doors closed behind her, Lucas realized he had never felt more powerless in his life. That night, he drove to the edge of town anyway. He parked across the street, engine off, and watched the neon lights flicker through the rain. Inside, he could see her moving between tables, her hair tied back, her shoulders heavier than before. He stayed until closing, just watching, the ache in his chest growing unbearable. The next morning, Claire found him in his office before dawn. "You look like you haven't slept," she said. "I haven't," he replied quietly. "I need you to find out who owns the deed to the diner now." "You do," she said, confused. "Not anymore," he said. "Transfer it." To her, Claire blinked. To the waitress, he nodded. "To Maya, Lucas. That's worth millions. Why would you—" "Because some things," he interrupted, "are worth more." But even as he said it, he knew money couldn't fix what he'd broken. He didn't want her gratitude. He wanted her to understand that somewhere along the way, she had changed him. That the man who once believed people were expendable now couldn't bear the thought of losing her respect. When Maya received the letter the next evening, she didn't believe it at first. Her name was on the deed. The diner was hers, but there was no note, no signature, just silence. And sometimes, silence hurts more than words ever could. The diner was saved, but something inside Maya wasn't. Every corner reminded her of the man who'd sat there night after night, speaking little but listening deeply. The man she had trusted, who turned out to be the same one holding the power to erase her world. She wanted to hate him. She told herself she did. But when she looked at the signed deed on the wall, her heart whispered something crueler, that she missed him. Tom noticed it first. "You should be happy," he said one morning as he counted the register. "You own this place now." "You won." "Did I?" she asked quietly, wiping a counter that didn't need wiping. "It doesn't feel like winning." She worked longer hours after that, as if exhaustion could replace the ache in her chest. But late at night, when the lights dimmed and the coffee machine hummed its lonely tune, she caught herself glancing at the door, half expecting him to walk in, half hoping he never would. Meanwhile, Lucas's world had begun to unravel in ways he hadn't anticipated. His board didn't understand the sudden decision to give away property worth millions. Investors demanded explanations. Rumors spread. But for the first time in his career, he didn't care. Claire found him staring out the window of his penthouse office, the city glittering below like a promise he no longer believed in. "You know," she said carefully, "you can't disappear forever. The world doesn't stop because of one woman." He didn't look at her. "Maybe it should." "Lucas," she said softly, "you did the right thing." "You made it right." He turned to her, his voice low. "I didn't do it to make it right. I did it because it's the only thing I've done in years that felt real." That night, he drove again to the edge of town. He didn't go inside the diner. He just parked under the same flickering streetlight, watching from a distance as laughter spilled from within. She was smiling, really smiling, serving a young couple at the window booth. He stayed there for an hour unseen, until the last customer left. Then he drove away, headlights cutting through the rain like unspoken words. Weeks passed. One afternoon, Maya's brother Daniel came by. He had always been protective, and the story of the billionaire had reached him through the gossip chain of a small town. "So," he said, leaning against the counter, "you gonna tell me why a man worth billions gave you this diner?" Maya sighed. Because he destroyed it first. Daniel frowned. Then why'd he fix it? She hesitated. Maybe guilt. Maybe kindness. I don't know anymore. Sounds like someone who regrets losing something he didn't mean to, Daniel said. Question is, do you? She didn't answer. But that night, after closing, she sat alone in the booth where Lucas used to sit. The seat still carried the faint smell of his cologne, something clean, distant, expensive. She placed her hand on the table, tracing the edge where his fingers once rested. Outside, headlights flashed. Her breath caught. A black car had stopped across the street. For a moment, she thought it was him. But the engine idled, then drove away. She exhaled, not sure whether she felt relief or disappointment. He was simply Lucas. When dawn broke, he reached across the table, his hand finding hers naturally. She didn't pull away. The storm outside had passed, and the warmth between them felt like morning after years of night. Stay, she said quietly. He nodded. This time I will. And as the first light of day touched their faces, neither of them knew exactly what the future would bring, only that whatever came next, they'd face it together. But destiny, as it often does, wasn't quite finished testing the strength of what they'd found. Spring returned with quiet grace, breathing color back into the small town. The vines that once lay bare began to bud again, their tender green shoots curling towards sunlight. The diner smelled of cinnamon and coffee, and laughter drifted from the corner booth, something that had been missing for far too long. Lucas sat there every morning now, but this time not as a stranger. He'd sold most of his corporate shares, keeping only what he needed to ensure the school and vineyard survived. The rest he let go of, along with the life that had nearly cost him his soul. Maya moved through the cafe with calm confidence, her smile softer but wiser. Sometimes she'd glance over and find him watching her, not as a man guarding something precious, but as one grateful to have finally found peace. Never thought I'd see the day, Sam. The old cook grumbled one morning as he refilled Lucas's cup. Billionaire sits here drinking diner coffee like it's fine wine, Lucas smiled. Maybe it is. Just took me too long to taste it properly. The man chuckled and shook his head. Guess love does strange things to people. Lucas didn't answer. He didn't need to. Later that afternoon, he walked out to the vineyard with Maya. The air smelled of rain and fresh soil. They paused near the edge of the hill, where the valley stretched endlessly below. I used to think everything worth having had to be conquered, Lucas said quietly. But I was wrong. The most valuable things, they're the ones that surrender to care, not control. Maya smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the sun. And yet you fought for this. I did, he admitted. Because love isn't control. It's courage. She turned toward him, brushing a lock of hair from her face. You've changed. He shook his head gently. No, you just saw the part of me I couldn't. A soft silence followed. The breeze carried the faint hum of bees and the echo of children's laughter from the nearby school. It was everything he'd built, everything he'd almost lost, and she was at the center of it when he took her hand. It wasn't with the urgency of a man afraid to lose again, but with the peace of someone who finally knew he was home. Maya, he said softly, if I ever forget again what matters, promise me you'll remind me. I won't have to, she replied, her voice warm. You'll remember every morning you wake up here. He smiled, leaning closer, until his forehead rested against hers. Then that's all I need. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in golden rose, the vineyard seemed to shimmer. The same light that had once divided them now wrapped them in warmth. For the first time, wealth and simplicity didn't stand on opposite ends. They had met in the middle, in love, in forgiveness, in quiet truth. Months later, when travelers passed through the small town, they'd hear about a man who once owned skyscrapers and satellites, who traded his empire for a diner and a vineyard. Some called him foolish. Others called him wise. But everyone agreed he looked happier than anyone they'd ever seen. He didn't care about the rumors. Each morning began the same: coffee, laughter, and the woman who reminded him that kindness had once saved his life. One night, under a sky scattered with stars, Maya asked, "Do you ever miss it? The city, the power?" Lucas thought for a moment. "Sometimes," he said honestly. "But I don't miss who I was in it," she nodded. "Then you're free." He looked at her, the woman who'd taught him that love wasn't found in the grand gestures or the noise of success, but in the quiet courage of everyday care. "Yes," he whispered. "I am." The moonlight brushed her face, turning her freckles to constellations. He kissed her then, slowly, deeply, like a man sealing a promise not of passion alone, but of permanence. And when they pulled apart, the world around them felt still. The wind softened, the vines rustled, and the stars seemed to lean closer, listening. Lucas smiled. "You know what I realized?" "What?" "That sometimes the heart isn't healed by what we get back, but by what we give up willingly." Maya looked at him for a long time. "Then maybe you were never meant to build empires, Lucas. Maybe you were meant to build this." He followed her gaze. The cafe, the vineyard, the people whose lives had quietly intertwined with theirs. And in that moment he understood. Everything he'd lost had led him exactly where he was supposed to be. The night settled around them like a quiet blessing. The billionaire and the waitress stood beneath the stars, not as opposites, but as equals, two souls that had found redemption in each other's light. If love could change a man like Lucas Vale, it could change anyone. Subscribe to be part of stories that still believe in love.